You know them all, so I don't have to introduce them. There are, of course, people in the audience as well, and they could also contribute. Now, the way I want to structure this session is like this. I will first request the panelists to very briefly, when I say very briefly means really very brief, to add any recommendations, and let's keep it to the recommendations and not to comments really. I mean, comments can come in, but essentially recommendations, so that we can take note of those recommendations. Thereafter, we have, with the help of the BIMSTEC Secretariat and Mr. Sumit, he's here, Mr.
Was here.
Worked out a draft outcome document, as is the practice in BIMSTEC meetings. This document will be put on the screen, and copies will be shortly circulated. It's a brief document, but which takes major recommendations, not all recommendations. It's not possible. That is a part of a report if it is made. Some major recommendations are there in the document, and we'll show that document on the screen as well as circulate. And we will like to have your comments, so that this can be then finalized in this very session. And then we would like to issue this as a document through the BIMSTEC Secretariat. In the afternoon, we will also have an interaction with the media, and there these recommendations can be, some of these can be shared. So this is the way. So that means it has to be very structured and a functional session, this one, working session. So let me begin by first requesting our esteemed panelists to make their remarks, and I'll begin. Maybe I'll begin. It's easier for me if I begin first with you. Yes, I think you are reading for Professor Surat, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Dr. Arvind Gupta, Mr. Chair, and distinguished participants. I should be downstairs, down there in the track one, listening to you, because I am from the government, and this is the opportunity of us, the government, to learn from the esteemed academicians in the room on the track two. However, I have been given honored to deliver a very short paper, BIMSTEC Regional Security, the way forward from the perspective of a Thai think tank. This is a presentation of Associate Professor Surat Horachai-kun, Director, Indian Studies Centers of Chulalongkorn University, ISC, Bangkok, Thailand, in its capacity as Thailand's member of the BIMSTEC Network Policy Think Tank, BNPTT. So this is his message to us. And of course, I will be ready, like our National Security Council representative, to listen very keenly to what we can learn from our track two colleagues. This is his Professor Surat's paper. Mr. Chairman, distinguished participants, fellow BIMSTEC academicians, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Indian Studies Centers of Chulalongkorn University, ISC, Thailand's member of the BIMSTEC Network Policy Think Tanks, or BNPTT, and on my own behalf, I would like to offer a greeting from Bangkok, as well as a best wish for the dialogue's success, and also an apology for not being able to personally attend this dialogue. Incidentally, today the ISC is preoccupied with another important academic event at home that can also be said to be in service of BIMSTEC, namely a special lecture at Chulalongkorn University by a former Thai ambassador to Bangladesh and Bhutan on her experience about Thailand's relationship with these two BIMSTEC countries, as well as a BIMSTEC film festival aiming at fostering better understanding of the Thai public towards BIMSTEC countries. After the Royal Thai Embassy in New Delhi contacted us, ISC considered that although the center itself cannot send any representative to attend the dialogue in New Delhi, at least ISC can partially contribute by recommending to fellow Thai academicians who are also police officers from the Royal Thai Police Academy to come and share their views. I hope the audience enjoyed their presentations yesterday. I myself also have some comments of my own on BIMSTEC cooperation on combating transnational crime that I wish to share with you later. Two recent significant directions of BIMSTEC. Recently, one can see two significant trends of BIMSTEC, namely the increased interest in more cooperation on security matters and the increased role of the so-called Track 2 and Track 1.5 organizations in BIMSTEC activity. This present dialogue is a good example of both trends or direction. The first trend is BIMSTEC more and more focused on national security matters, which reflects the fact or the realization that both in time and space, we are now living in an uncertainty. Historically speaking, we in BIMSTEC are living in an uncertain time of a multipolar world with rising concerns of disruptive developments, including the challenges to existing international orders, norms, and regulations. Geographically, we in BIMSTEC are living together in this part of the world between South and Southeast Asia, between the Indian and the Pacific Oceans, where external powers are trying to compete for their dominance and transnational, non-traditional security threats, both natural and man-made, are facing us all. Given their transnational nature, it is often impossible for any one country to cope with these security challenges alone by itself, and an international framework of cooperation is needed. Thanks last, I'm sorry, thanks largely to India's push, especially with India's initiation of convening the first meeting of BIMSTEC's national security chiefs in New Delhi in March 2017. BIMSTEC is now discussing to see how we can cooperate and face these security challenges. As the Thai Prime Minister General Prayut Chan-o-cha has stated during the fourth and latest BIMSTEC summit in Nepal in August, Thailand is willing to be the next host for the third meeting of BIMSTEC national security chiefs in March 2019. This shows Thailand's faithful commitment and unfailing support to BIMSTEC as one of its co-founders 21 years ago when BIMSTEC was still known as BISTEC. Looking back, it is interesting to note that back then, the BISTEC used to focus more on economic development and technical cooperation. Of course, any international organization or framework of cooperation can always adjust its focus or its interest and its activity to suit the changing environments, subjected to the collective will and decisions of its member arising from the members' communications and deliberations, taking into account, of course, everyone's readiness, sensitivity, and comfort level. As I said, the newfound attention in security matters reflect our collective realization of the uncertain time facing us. However, there needs to be a clear communication and agreement among members of how far an organization can go at one point in time into the new direction. To use ASEAN's parlance, we should go together, quote, at a pace comfortable to all, unquote, which admittedly sometimes can be said to be the same as the pace comfortable to the slowest. The latest case of the first BIMSTEC joint military exercise, or the MILEX 18 in Pune, is a case in point. Strictly for the logistical and budgetary reason, Thailand could not send a full contingent to this exercise without prior preparation and allotted budget in advance, but we have sent very senior officers of the Royal Thai Army to be an observer to show our solidarity with BIMSTEC. Secondly, one of the methods chosen lately by BIMSTEC to try to understand and address these uncertainties together is the increasing use of deliberations and dialogues in the Track 2 settings, so that the governments, the Track 1 decision makers, may conceivably be able to understand more clearly and cope up and can help cope up with the complexities of current multidimensional security challenges. It can be argued that the role of the Track 2 institutes in the work of BIMSTEC is actually not entirely new. Our host, India itself, is famous for its Track 1.5 diplomacy, with Vivekananda International Foundation, VIF, as an example of the think tanks, along with maybe the Institutes for Defense Studies and Analysis, IDSA, the Research and Information System for Developing Countries, RIS, the Indian Foundation, and so on, authors. If I may, I would like to remind us all that at BIMSTEC level, There also exists already the mechanism for track 2 cooperation, namely the BIMSTEC network of political think tanks, or BNPTT, of which the ISC has the honor and privilege to be the member representing Thailand. BNPTT was established subsequent to the decision taken at the second BIMSTEC summit held in New Delhi on the 13th November 2008. The first meeting of the BNPTT was held in New Delhi from 18 to 19 February 2010, and the second meeting of BNPTT was held in Bangkok from 8 to 9 October 2015. Certainly, it is true that under the current framework of BIMSTEC, BNPTT and the Track 2 Cooperation of BIMSTEC think tanks is considered to be in the sector of people-to-people context and not yet in the security area. But we may make use of this existing framework without having to reinvent the wheel. BIMSTEC may task the BNPTT with additional specific institutions to look into security matters and even invite more think tanks in BIMSTEC countries which are directly involved in strategic and security matters to join the NPT as needed. Well, I will go straight. I will give the full paper to the BIFF now. So I will go straight to the to Professor Surat's substantial recommendation.
Kindly be brief because we have to cover a lot of ground.
Okay. 4 areas of security threats. I have noted that the agenda of this BIMSTEC regional think tank dialogue has focused on 4 areas of common security threats facing us all, namely terrorism and radicalization, maritime security, transnational crime, and disaster management. Many of these threats are non-regional threats. Some involve non-state actors and various stakeholders. Some are man-made and others are natural. All of them are of transnational nature that transcend national border. Yesterday, various speakers have spoken on this issue at length, so allow me now to share my thoughts on some of these issues. On our common fight against terrorism and radicalization, some participants have already highlighted the importance of social media, which I agree. Others have pondered if we can use our common wisdom and civilizational capital in the region. Buddhism and Hinduism, as well as interfaith dialogues, have been raised for this purpose. I think this is an interesting idea. We can safely say that within the area around the Bay of Bengal, one can find almost every great religion, faith, philosophy, and ideology of humankind, ranging from Hinduism to Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, liberal democracy, to Marxism. Would it be possible for to see this if this great school of thoughts might be used to serve peaceful de-radicalization? Again, if we might want to retask the BNPTT and expand it to cover think tanks that are specifically involved in security studies, maybe we also can invite think tanks and institutions that are interested in peace study to join us. On maritime security, BIMSTEC happens to be one of the links between the South and Southeast Asia and the 2 oceans. And so BIMSTEC will probably have to think of the new concept or catchphrase of Indo-Pacific, which is now still evolving. Like ASEAN, which is deliberating among themselves about the principal role vis-a-vis the concept of Indo-Pacific, with China in the background, BIMSTEC also has to collectively think of its possible relevant role towards Indo-Pacific. One problem that can be said to belong to both the topics of maritime security and national crime is the irregular maritime migration of people, which is a complex issue with the security, humanitarian, human rights, and law enforcement dimension that at that time may involve human trafficking. I do not have any solution to recommend, only that BIMSTEC must look into this problem together. This is happening within our region. Much has been discussed about the maritime security and its relation with the blue economy and maritime connectivity. Thailand itself happens to be on the shore of the 2 oceans, so we are very much interested in this discussion. Again, the Track 2 think tank and institution concerning the UNCLOS and other international laws of the sea, as well as the blue economy, can be invited to join the BNPTT. But we should not disregard the mountain economy and the importance of the river connectivity for our Nepal and Bhutan friends. And cross-border security along the rivers to the sea from Bhutan and Nepal may also be studied and discussed as the expansion of the maritime security. On combating transnational crime, may I stress that transnational crime requires transnational cooperation. Each of the BIMSTEC member states must really come together and create a framework of cooperation that is really working at a regional level, a BIMSTEC level. We should study in depth until we can answer to ourselves What is the nature of transnational crime in our region? What are the links? So we can focus our collective endeavors towards these issues. Law enforcement agencies of each BIMSTEC country must work together proactively against the criminals who are already thinking and acting beyond the limits of national boundaries. So the good guys must also think and work likewise. We should try to share information more and work together more on the preventive actions. BIMSTEC should see if there might be a regional mechanism that can be deployed on this matter, perhaps along the line of the Europol in Europe or the ASEANAPOL in ASEAN. On this matter, I am certain that my two friends and fellow academicians from the Royal Thai Police will be happy to discuss more with you further. On disaster management, this is a very important area of operation and part of the non-traditional security issues. 4 years ago in 2014, we in Thailand solemnly remember the victims of the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, which affected the southern part of Thailand as well as Indonesia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, India, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Maldives, and some African countries. We still have to be on alert and be prepared to help each other the next time Mother Nature might strike us. In this area, I would like to say that one international framework which Thailand has actively played its part in shaping is the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. In ASEAN, we also have the AHA Center or the ASEAN Coordination Center for Humanitarian Assistance, AHA. Apart from our own national plan, and of course, I believe other countries also have national plan as well for disaster management. We also recognize India's role in hosting the Asian Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction 2016 in New Delhi. Perhaps BIMSTEC may coordinate with these frameworks with a view to further develop our own framework of cooperation on this particular issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there's very useful suggestions here. But now we come back to our functional part of our work here, and we will take note of these suggestions which are here. Now we have put it on the screen, and this will be slowly rotated. But in the meanwhile, I request my esteemed panelists to make their comments in about 2 to 3 minutes, so that whatever you think is the most important suggestion should come in. And then we will also, just in a few minutes, we'll be circulating the hard copy, and you could also look at that, please.
Okay, since the discussion has taken place, I will only quickly mention the recommendations that I have thought. My number one recommendation is that we use Sagar as a platform to combine all the outcome of all the initiatives regarding the maritime domain in the Indian Ocean and do some studies and make some policy recommendations for the BIMSTEC region. My recommendation number two is I really do not know exactly the details of the BIMSTEC Secretariat in Dhaka, but to establish a Director General or Director post for maritime affairs under the BIMSTEC, who should be coordinating the future activities. Then in combining with that, I would recommend number three, derive a common maritime strategy for BIMSTEC region. I mean, we don't have a narrative, we don't have a doctrine, we don't have a strategy. So that should combine the 7 nations together, especially the 5 nations which are having maritime. Then my fourth recommendation is to consider including Indonesia, because how do we derive the Bay of Bengal without Indonesia is a question. So Indonesia is a major player in ASEAN, and they have also the global maritime fulcrum now. So to recommend to include Indonesia. My fifth recommendation is to use blue economic concept as a connector, because we all need to develop our countries, and the ocean is the next domain for resources. So as a way of combining prosperity and security through blue economy is my other recommendation. Then the next recommendation is to develop a BIMSTEC-wide MDA concept with developing a combined operation picture for the Bay of Bengal, so that we know at least on white shipping before we actually come to the gray shipping and the black shipping, at least to share information among the BIMSTEC members. But it should not be really, it should not mean that we are catering the Bay of Bengal only for the Bay of Bengal region, but to know the picture. Then that would be the multilateral security system that we have. Then the next recommendation is, of course, enhance maritime trade as a way of combining security, because security and trade goes hand in glove with that. And also another recommendation with the trade is the multilateral investment. When only one particular country is investing in a particular country, it gives rise to suspicion. So I would recommend that we need to focus on multilateral investment or foreign direct investment as a way of maintaining security. And another area is a joint research center for oceanography or ocean hydrography or ocean affairs. And I also like to propose something that Pathfinder has already proposed earlier, maybe a code of conduct for BIMSTEC region, totally based on UNCLOS, and a legally binding one for the BIMSTEC region, a code of conduct in the absence of a regional mechanism. Because I think we need to shape our narrative, we need to find regional solutions to regional issues. And another point, even the Thailand professor mentioned, the people-to-people contact in relaxing of visa rules and connectivity. And my final recommendation is, I think we heard quite a lot about the HADR in the morning and about the maritime HADR. So we need a center like AHA Center. And I would like to propose Trincomalee in Sri Lanka. There is abundance of water, shelter, space for a HADR center focusing on the Bay of Bengal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I request Major General Rashid to kindly make his remarks.
Thank you, Chair. We have discussed, I'll be talking on the point of terrorism and radicalization. We discussed yesterday, but if I concise and make a summarized recommendation, the first thing I would recommend that the region should be brought under a common security regime. That's important. I think this decision has been taken earlier too, but we have not seen much of its progress. This is very important. Another important aspect is that the legal framework to build the cooperation. So we have seen some of the cooperation to counter terrorism in the SARC platform, but we have to develop some of the BIMSTEC platform as well. The third one is from the experience of the SARC, we can say that international confidence and the trust, there is a deficit. So we must be able to take the measures to ensure trust and mutual confidence. So that is very important. Otherwise, everybody will sign the convention and nobody will implement it or ratify it. So that's important that we must have some sharing. And about the intelligence, that was a common recommendation. Everybody will agree that we must have what is called regional real-time intelligence exchange, for which I would recommend a control headquarter, a regional control headquarter, from where this sharing will take place. Because a individual nation once interact to avail the sharing, so it takes long time. So that is one important thing, the control headquarter for the intelligence sharing. And I would also recommend a regional counter-terrorist task force. So that would be actually that jointness that would develop the jointness and the mutual confidence as well. So those were the important aspects on the terrorism. And there are some few were there. We must integrate the terrorism. Yesterday it was part of the things that counterterrorism measures must be integrated with also the transnational crime, organized crime, so that we can fight it together. It is so integrated now that it is difficult to to separate from others. So others are the small one. I think it will come up. So time is short. I'm just finishing here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. May I request Dasho Shivan Rinzin to kindly make his remarks.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I know it's been two very useful and enriching days of engagement, and there were several recommendations which just going to discuss on in a while. For now, I thought I will just not make any specific recommendation, but coming from a think tank, share three thoughts at this point. Number one, I particularly feel that given the usefulness of the last 2 days, there is a need to continue this engagement and dialogue. Particularly, this one has served as a springboard for more useful future engagements, and also in terms of providing pragmatic, meaningful recommendations to higher initiatives. I think this is a good platform to be continued. And also, since we all think tanks, we all know there is another grouping called the BIMSTEC Network of Policy Think Tanks. Perhaps some thoughts could be given on how they can be involved as well, so as to avoid duplication of work. Point number 2 I would like to highlight is this thing about aspirations versus realities. Again, representing a think tank, I feel that perhaps if BIMSTEC as a region is not doing very well as envisaged, perhaps maybe one reason could be the issue of prioritization. 14 areas of cooperation, and with a contribution of, in economic terms, of just 5% of the total members' GDP, as compared to 30% of ASEAN. Perhaps maybe we, as a group, must have tried to bite more than what we can chew. Looks like that to me. And even this, I would believe, will apply to our group as think tanks. If we have too many things on the plate, perhaps we may not go very much forward. So some prioritization, I feel, both at this dialogue level and perhaps, if possible, at the BIMSTEC level is a matter of urgency. And finally, I would like to emphasize on the need for more targeted and calibrated actions by members. We have heard in the last few days a lot on the need for information sharing, data sharing, and my belief is we have been talking about this for the last 21 years. So perhaps we are all developing countries, we have resource constraints. Even to host a dialogue like this, I'm sure it costs the organizers a lot of money. And I think we have to really get the worth for our investment, and perhaps at all possible levels of engagement, some stock taking may need to be done, because otherwise the process will go on without the outputs that we all aspire for. I will stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those remarks. And now I request Ambassador Sunthadhar to kindly make his.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, our discussion since the last 2 days reminds me of this famous saying that we live in the best of times, we live in the worst of times. In the sense that the world and the whole region, in my view, is in a crossroad with the possibility of unlimited potential for peace, prosperity, and dignity. And yet there are, as we have discussed, real serious threats and challenges. In that sense, by way of recommendation, the first thing that I would like to suggest is for us to reflect deeply why the need for us to again reassemble within the BIMSTEC framework, despite the fact that we've all interacted in different forums for the last, at least I have done it for the last 30, 40 years. And in fact, written the same things, talked about the same things, and then the same things keep repeating. Why is it? What made those forums unsuccessful? And as a result, what will make BIMSTEC and our forum different and more successful in what we want to do? In that sense, the first recommendation for us as think tanks is, as I said yesterday, I would really like to take my hat off and jacket off and really reflect and act as think tanks on more wisdom, because I see the 5 paradoxes of our time, the best of times and worst of times. It's too long for me to go into that, but we live in a world and area of paradoxes, and we need to come out of those and identify areas where we can really come together and try and redress some of those issues. And to do that, the first thing is move beyond the excessively power-centric behavior of state apparatus, and for us think tanks to really think fresh and new. That's my first suggestion in this Second is for BIMSTEC to be better. Incidentally, I was not in Kathmandu when the fourth BIMSTEC summit was taking place. Soon after I came back, of course, the drill in Pune had overshadowed the wonderful outcomes that the meeting had come up with. So I wrote a piece called ASEAN SARC to BIMSTEC. And we really want, as repeated, we want to be a bridge. For that, we need to understand what really drives the course of interstate relations. Yesterday, I was talking a little bit about this notion of national interest versus the need to harmonize individual national interest into a broader regional interest. And for that, I think the important thing that I see, and I've written very extensively on SARC, why is it that SARC has not taken off? And the very assumption that you can cooperate on difficult political and security issues without the level of trust and confidence among the member states is a proof that SARC, what is happening in SARC. So as a result, we need to really focus on real issues and what brings us together. That, I think, is what will bring us closer together. And in that sense, I've looked at this document, and my hats off to Dr. Gupta and Secretariat, and of course, our friend there, that they've done a fantastic job. So it reflects that this forum is not exclusionary. The idea of Indonesia has come up. That in fact, this forum is not targeted against anyone. And that was part of the reason, I can tell you very frankly, that inhibits some of us to be actively engaged in this. So it's very important that this document reflects that spirit. So that's, I think, my second point. The third, and more operationally, I see for us to a need to, man is wiser in retrospect. So there is real need for retrospection and introspection. And that introspection demands at three levels. One is at us as individuals, at responsible members of society, and in a way, opinion builders. Second, at the institutional level. Yesterday, there was this talk about why is it that if it was governance, why is it that nations that are supposedly are very well governed also send their educated people to institutions like the IS? But there I remember Niraj Chaudhary's Three Horsemen of a New Apocalypse. There he writes, which touches me very, very well. He says, man's greatest happiness lies in living on the strength of his illusions. So let's not delude ourselves that we need reflection and we need better governance, because part of the problems that we are discussing, the four issues that we discussed, is partly a reflection of the need for better governance internally as institutions. And the third is the interstate, and of course BIMSTEC as the secretariat, in the sense that what do we see in SARC and now EU? EU was supposed to be the highest, best advanced form of regional cooperation, even to the extent of sharing sovereignty. But what are we seeing now? There are two very serious issues. One is over-politicization, and second, excessive bureaucratization. So if BIMSTEC is to be different, then I think when we design the secretariat, the fourth SARC summit, the BIMSTEC summit has also identified the institutional dimension of BIMSTEC. It has created commissions. So we must keep that in mind, that it is not bureaucratic, but without also being politicized. And my final is what is exactly related with our friend Chewang's suggestion, that in fact I find this 2 days very useful, very relevant, and as a result, in fact, I would even be very interested if somebody would, the need for continuity, but continuity in the sense that oftentimes when you engage in this kind of discourses, it's not really a discourse. It's a debate or, in fact, discussion. For a real discourse, you need much more in-depth and much more time and much more limiting in terms of participation. So they have better. So as a succession to what we have done now, and in fact, as part of the continuity, perhaps we need to focus on specific issues and bring together people who are specifically related with those, not a generalist like me, that I can talk about many things. So if you disaggregate in our next meetings to that extent, then I think this would be a very, very worthwhile exercise. And final one, there was a small thing I wanted to make a comment on the disaster thing, the last session, and it was related to Nepal's earthquake. One is there was an example of interstate cooperation, as the gentleman very rightly pointed out, that in fact, when we ourselves were lost as to what to do, there was help assistance from India that in fact it arrived. So it's an example of the relationship between the two countries. Second, of course, subsequently what happened is on the day the earthquake hit, I was at the golf course. So I have a piece called Earthquake at the Golf Course. That reflects the humane dimension of what happens when disaster hits, what happens to an individual. And the other one is called disaster diplomacy. That in fact, disaster, of course, diplomacy traditionally is created to prevent man-made disasters. And of course, more than natural disasters, man-made disasters are much more devastating, as we know in the world. But since on the natural disaster side, some of the issues that we faced as a society when that tremendous disaster hit us are there, and as a result, that can be give some of my reflections on this. With this, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sankara. Thank you very much for those wise words. Now I request Hemant Kotalwar from the NSAs to make his remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Gupta, and thank you, my co-panelists, for giving this suggestion for on this important topics. Of course, this discussion had been very useful, and I must thank Dr. Gupta and BIF for having organized this conference of think tanks. It has been a very useful, and I think all the recommendations would be useful for the policymakers. In fact, this BIMSTEC is a 21-year-old adult, but I feel that still I think we need to work hard because this adult has somehow not grown very. Still not mature. Still, I think we need to work hard so that we give him more strength, and that is the reason why we need trust, we need deeper integration, we need cooperation of all the members, so that we can so that BIMSTEC is able to face the headwinds, mainly because of terrorism, because of transnational crime, because of the non-traditional security measures and other things. Now, as far as the recommendations are concerned, in fact, the discussions I think we had over the last 2 days have been very useful. And most of the recommendations, I think they have already been covered by the co-panelists. But two specific recommendations that I would like to suggest. One is on the space cooperation, because we can even think of having a BIMSTEC satellite so that the resources could be shared, the advantages of space cooperation, whether for exploring resources, for maritime cooperation, or whether the transnational crimes or other things. So we could actually work together to have this particular thing. And the other is cybersecurity. Of course, there was a mention of cybersecurity in this outcome document that has been circulated, and we could in fact we are also organizing a workshop for the BIMSTEC member countries on that is a cyber workshop. But I think we could think of further integrating and deeper cooperation in the field of cybersecurity, so that we move beyond the bilateral cooperation that we have on the cybersecurity. And as far as disaster management and other non-traditional security issues are concerned, I think the recommendations have been very useful, and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Hemant. Now, I request Dr. Naing Ayu.
No, Madam
Sorry,
Wu.
Madam, sorry? Yeah, Madam, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Oh, there are two different, oh, I'm sorry. There's some problem here. Madam Wu, for making her remarks, and since she's making her appearance for the first time, I'll give her a little bit more time for if you
Okay,
have to
thank you.
say.
Thank you, Excellency, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate very much because this is my first intervention. Allow me to thank the Vivekananda Foundation to inviting me and giving me a chance to meet with my all colleagues from 20 years ago and 10 years ago and also get involved in the BIMSTEC matters. Actually, I was deeply involved in the BIMSTEC working group in Bangkok, Thailand, 10 years ago. That you all are aware that Thailand is kindly hosted the BIMSTEC working group till the secretariat was established in Dhaka in 2014. That's why I attached to the BIMSTEC, and I feel like I am with all my relatives here. Except Bhutan, I was in all the all the BIMSTEC countries. Yeah, I stayed and I visited, and I will be brief, and I will not go into detail because of the time constraint. But I want to draw the attention of my experience in the BIMSTEC working group in Bangkok that our embassies in BIMSTEC embassies were very close and also in a friendly manners. Even though a very heated debate, we can solve a very friendly manner. This is at that time Indians ambassadors initiatives and the active roles of Sri Lankan and Bangladesh embassies. We take this example, and we should more interact, more connect in the diplomatic missions, diplomatic level. This is according to my experience. Another one is BIMSTEC Myanmar relations. Myanmar hosted the third BIMSTEC summit in 2014. Also at the same year, we hosted the ASEAN summit. That's why coming to my mind is both members of the both regional sub-regional organizations that I feel that to avoid the overlapping, the two sub-regional organizations should cooperate more, and also I think Thailand will feel the similar way, because I just want to inform you that last month only we hosted the 12th ASEAN ministerial meeting on TNC, transnational crime, and also ASEAN adopted already for the TNC action plan 2018 to 2025. That's a little bit advanced compared to BIMSTEC. That's how we can share the experience between two organizations. And also, Mr. Chairman, I have also some experience that information sharing with ASEAN NAPOL, Interpol, and because I have heard about the information sharing, and also with UNODC, and then SCAP and other relevant organizations. That's we should look into their expertise also, because the United Nations level international organizations also, they have their own agenda on the TNC. And the third recommendation, this is I am a member of the Parliamentary Advisory Commission. I think the role of the parliament should be included in our list, because We need more capacity building among us for lawmaking on security or even other subjects. And also, for the transnational crime, our legal system should be compatible for each other. That's why I feel that we should cooperate among our parliaments. That actually our parliament is the youngest in the region, and also the capacity building. We need the capacity building, and the Indian Parliament is this is to take its advantage to be here. The Indian Parliament is one of the leading development partners, and we appreciate it very much. And like this, we should exchange our experiences for lawmaking with among our parliaments. And also, Excellency, another one is after listening to the statements, I think that in the national level, the good governance is very important. In Myanmar, the new democratic government not even completed 1 year yet. We have to the government has to solve the various long time issues of corruption, drugs, and also the displacement of persons and the mindset of the people. This is not an easy task for the government. That's why we want to request the understanding of the member states, each other, political and economic challenges. Because, our democratic reform is very recently, and we need time and also understanding and cooperation from our BIMSTEC colleagues, because Myanmar people are afraid of repeating the history. That's we need the patience and understanding from the BIMSTEC colleagues. Another point is I think good neighborliness. We can't choose neighbors, but we can if we can establish a friendly relations, we will solve the problem bilaterally, and it will be helpful. And we are happy for the Prime Minister Modi's policy on neighbors. And also another thing is we need to address more on, this is our own concern, Myanmar's concern, on fake news, hate speeches, media manipulation, technology-related crimes, as we lag behind the knowledge in the fourth IT revolution age. And I would like, that's why it is necessary for the more advanced members of the BIMSTEC to help us for research, training, and investment, especially in IT sector. If I may quote the Myanmar sayings that if the front of a house is noisy, the back can't be quiet. That's why we all are the same region, like us, the same. We stay in the same home. That's why we need the cooperation of the advanced members. And also, I would like to echo the scholars' views that this is also a very common one. We need the holistic approach. But when I look at the summit declarations, all the 14 areas of our sectors are all covered what we need. Only we need to approach holistically and also to implement it effectively. Because there is the rise of extremism around the world. This is related to frustration of people, extreme poverty, unpromising future for youth, gender equality, lack of education, unemployment, urbanization, abuse IT technology, and so on and so forth. We have to counter all these things. And also, what I want to congratulate you here is our efforts here reflects the United Nations Security Council's encouragement it issues in May 2018 to the member states, relevant sub-regional and regional and international organizations to enhance cooperation and adopt strategies to prevent terrorists from being beneficial from TNC. That's why we continue to join hands at various levels, starting from think tanks. I sincerely hope that we will reach the leaders' aim at the fourth summit in Kathmandu towards a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable Bay of Bengal region during our lifetime. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we have still about 45 minutes to discuss this document. 2-3 points I want to make, and then I'll request Mr. Sumit to say a little bit about this document and what it has and what it doesn't have, and how we can, if any changes need to be done. I think, firstly, this meeting is essentially a think tank's meeting to discuss security issues. Of course, security is a wider concept, so we have discussion on non-traditional security issues, etc. But very often, think tanks are criticized for being too general and not being too specific. But I think deep thinking, introspection, reflection is a very much a part of think tank activity, and I thank all of you, particularly Ambassador Sinkhada, who made some very thoughtful remarks. I think some very deep suggestions and suggestions of far-reaching consequences have also been made here, and particularly coming from Admiral Kulambash. And perhaps we haven't had the time to look into some of them more deeply. For instance, whether a particular country should be in BIMSTEC. Now that requires, I think, of course, it can be discussed, but whether in these 2 days we can do that. But certainly, many of these suggestions provide the basis for further discussions, and which should certainly look into this. So that's why the document that has been prepared, it has captured the main, as we felt, the main recommendation on which there was a general consensus. And the others are food for thought, and we will certainly look into that. I think the point made by Mr. Rinzin about prioritization is extremely important, and that applies for a meeting like this as well. Because if you take too much on your plate, then also you're not going to be able to do what you're supposed to do. So even what we have included is, I think, is a very full agenda. But since this is going to be a continuous process, and I hope this is the recommendation we are making, so some of these issues we could discuss, but prioritization backed by resources, backed by institutions, mechanisms, that's where we need to focus on. So I very much take that point about prioritization, and that also is reflected in the way the recommendations have been formulated in this document. I think the point about trust, particularly dealing with issues like terrorism or information sharing, even to take up the issues like transnational crime, this is very important. But trust is not built overnight, and there are many other, the agencies. Every organization has its own organizational culture, ethos, and in every country it varies. But I think the need, you said that we have been discussing this for so many 40 years, and we write the same things, and it doesn't happen. A lot of it, I think, is attributed to the cultural ethos or organizational ethos and different countries. But if we come together and make these points repeatedly, perhaps it can make a difference. A very important point which has come up again and again in the discussions is that the cooperation between BIMSTEC and ASEAN. And this came out very strongly in the context of disaster management, the need for studying the model of AHA. And I think we can start with AHA and then we can end with WAHA. So hopefully, but the point about the link between ASEAN and BIMSTEC, and in a different context, what Mr. Yogendra Kumar yesterday mentioned, between BIMSTEC and IONS, and in the context of maritime security. And actually, you can have many such linkages under different headings. So if BIMSTEC has to grow and it has to learn, I think so these linkages can be built, and that's a point I think it's been reflected in about the ASEAN thing. Yeah, it is there. So these are the general points I wanted to make, and I think it's very important that we should think as to how we could continue this dialogue. We have put in here that BIMSTEC Secretariat, we do consultations, etc., and think of the next meeting. But in order not to lose the momentum that we have already built, and consultations take time, etc. So I would like to put a proposal here that until we come to a point where we have a well-organized structure of who will hold rotation, etc., we will be happy to organize yet another meeting, maybe sometimes next year, if nobody else comes forward. We can do that, and we can take up some of these issues to formulate agenda for the next meeting, so that there is a continuity. Continuity is very important. Venue is not so important, but continuity is very important. But of course, we'll be very happy to rotate this in amongst various countries. But we'll be happy to propose. I'm proposing that we could, and I hope the NSAs also would support us in this, because without your support, this won't happen. We can probably hold this meeting, another meeting of a similar nature, and with a fresh agenda next year at a mutually acceptable dates, etc. Now, I'll request Sumitji to just very briefly introduce this document and how you have structured it, and then we can have some comments, and then we hope that we can finalize this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we did, myself and Director Pankaj from the Secretariat, we built upon the draft you gave yesterday. So we have captured some of the ideas, and we really wanted to have this outcome document which is workable. Now, I also heard a number of suggestions from this panel. What has happened in BIMSTEC is that we put a lot of suggestions. Of course, these are relevant suggestions, but then when it comes to the implementation, for the last 3 years, in fact, now, in fact, Pankaj and Shering both are here. They know how difficult it is for the implementation process, because even can I make this suggestion that the last during the retreat, we agreed to have a BIMSTEC master plan on connectivity. Still, some of the member countries are not submitting recommendations. I mean, observation. So it is difficult. So we thought that let us have this simple. And Mr. Chairman, I take your view fully. The next meeting, not to lose the momentum, the next meeting should also be in India, so that we can see until the rotational system is agreed upon. Because this is 1.5 track. It's not fully government 1.5. So you need resources. We put that, we took the subjects and then we will change it to theme, not session 1 and 2. We have, so we have taken the first one is the threat of terrorism. Then we have also mentioned that action taken by the joint working group. In fact, we have recognized the BIMSTEC joint working group on counterterrorism and transnational crime. They have done a lot of work. Under that, there is a very important subgroup called subgroup on legal and law enforcement issues. They are the people who actually designed these two conventions, the Counterterrorism Convention and MLAT. So we recognize that that also we have given that thought, And we also brought the document which we jointly finalized in 2017. And I repeatedly said that it's a wonderful document, it's a workable document. And in fact, on these security matters, it should be the Bible for BIMSTEC. So we brought that one. Then under each category, we have identified, giving a basic explanation. Thereafter, the meeting reached certain recommendations. Recommendations are also there. We also incorporated the AHA, especially in disaster management, and then also we brought very important element called early warning system and early warning and remote sensing capabilities. So this is all in all, Mr. Chairman. I think what I believe is that we can spend another 2-3 hours and bring a absolutely refined document, but I can tell you it will not be workable there.
Yes.
So let us have this. Since this is the first meeting, let us have a humble beginning, and the outcome document will be the base. And also, Mr. Chairman, I think some of the think tanks also need to start working, not to wait till next meeting. The idea is that when we meet, not me, somebody else, when we meet again, there should be tangible at least few tangible outcomes. Otherwise, we will not be able to justify the resources that we are putting in.
Yes.
So that's the basic explanation, and everybody can spend some time and then give us a final document to the BIMSTEC Secretariat. Mr. Pankaj is there to make some of the corrections, if at all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I think that was very nicely summarized, and the logic was put very nicely. And I quite agree that let's begin wherever, humble, and then build on that. I think just want to make a couple of points. Cyber security was mentioned. Now, as Hemant said, cybersecurity is a totally another group which is working on. So there's no point, duplicating that. That's why we did not put a separate session. Although cybersecurity is a very, very important issue, but since there is already, but we can take note of their work, etc. Similarly, counterterrorism, and there's a working group, etc. So I think there are a number of BIMSTEC working groups which are already there. The idea of the NSA level meetings, and this is to bring them together and see what they're doing. But we do not necessarily have to repeat exactly what they have been saying. So, but new issues have come up, and I think we should probably focus on that. So that's why this cyber security. Let me see whether there's another point, any other point I want to. I think this parliament point we could probably add. This is parliamentarians, or is it a working group?
It is not coming under the regional security. It should be part of the people contact.
Yes, people. No, the point is, but I think still it's been mentioned here. We could mention it because it's the like disasters. Unless you have an awareness, unless you have the local governments, unless you have training, those kind of things. So probably we could just mention that's a very important. And she's a only parliamentarian we have.
Not parliamentarian.
No?
Excuse me, Excellency, just one point.
Yes.
Because of the time constraint, I didn't elaborate the cooperation among the BIMSTEC parliaments. This is true MPs. We can get. I'm not MP. I'm the advisor.
Okay,
Through MPs, we can get the people-to-people contact. I just want to point out these people-to-people contacts, but not because of the time constraint.
Okay, so
I
we
didn't
can add
elaborate.
that. I think.
And also, the ratification of conventions also very important for us, because the awareness of the international or BIMSTEC conventions very difficult for our parliamentarians to understand. That's why we need to exchange the knowledge this two, ratification of conventions and people-to-people
But
contact.
ratification is there here. That point is been mentioned here. That point is there.
I think during the fourth BIMSTEC summit, that the declaration there is a mention about creating a BIMSTEC parliamentarian forum,
Okay.
and the secretary is receiving comments from the member states. So I have no problem.
As a reference to that, we can just add that. Madam has made this point here.
In summit declaration, it states like that, agree to explore possibility of establishing appropriate BIMSTEC forums for parliamentarians, universities, academia, research institutes, cultural organizations, and media community to expand the scope of people-to-people contacts. So in this regard, we have received a communication from Minister of External Affairs India, maybe a couple of days back. That it seems India has taken up at their level with the other member states how to go about in having a forum of parliamentarians. So and we also probably got some comments regarding to have some kind of arrangement of this though specifically this on this women parliamentarians, like something like that. We have received some comments on that.
Okay.
So I think we're working
So
on that
it's
field.
working. Okay. I think we have a comment from our Minister of External Affairs.
And that has communications already reached the secretariat,
Okay.
and then turn up circulated to the member nations. So we'll be consolidating on that, and it will definitely fructify.
So I think that answers the question. Yeah. So we'll just have a few minutes for discussion, and then I'll come to you. Yeah. Please.
Thank you, Chair. I will confine myself to the maritime security theme. Of course, I actually am quite comfortable with what our good Admiral has stated in terms of what the way forward could be on this. Though, of course, I must say that it is at variance with what the chairman yesterday when he summed up the discussion, but that's that apart. I just want to make just one or two points on the maritime security issue. Perhaps we could make a reference to the Prime Minister's speech, Sagar's speech, and also
Yes, I think
Shangri-La.
Sagar we should probably add that. Yeah, we should add that.
Yeah. The second thing, of course, is that it has been covered in general, but as Admiral said, that strengthening the capacity of the Secretariat, specifically looking into the maritime security issues, is very critical because to an extent, they will drive the agenda. Second point is that, or the second point, of course, is that we are talking about the annual convening of the BIMSTEC think tank forum. That's actually a very good idea. But even before that, maybe in consultation with the national security advisors, perhaps some of these topics could be specified in between the next session where the think tanks actually can have, let's say, some kind of working group which can actually go into greater detail and have more specific input on some of these critical issues that we are facing. Thank you.
See, as we heard that the next NSA level meeting is most likely going to be in Thailand. Is that somebody did say that, no? No, Dhaka to ho gaya. Yes, national security chiefs. Yeah, national security chiefs. So that's going to and this will really provide that input. I don't think we'll have the time to now really set up working groups, etc. Because there are enough number of suggestions and we will forward it to them. I think yes. One point about I forgot to mention. I think Sumiji here. Yeah, I think Saga is a very good idea that we could very strongly. Yeah, so we could just probably add that.
There's somebody there who wants.
And no, I have a number of. I'll just come to you. I got a few names here. Now, Ambassador Rajagopalan.
Just 2 points. One is on this group, the parliamentarians. Your point is well taken that you do have group of parliamentarians and educationalists meeting separately for the entire BIMSTEC. But under this subhead called regional security, the parliamentarians and educational institutions have a role to play, specific role to play. So we need to mention it somehow, either bring in think tanks involved in parliamentary studies or educational institutions, NGOs, whatever, into this group of regional security so that the input from the parliamentarians and the educationalists also forms a part of the think tank recommendation to BIMSTEC. That's my first point. Second is space security was mentioned. And you did mention also cyber security. Now, these two, space and cyber security, are there are very specific and similar considerations when you talk about both these subjects. And of late, many institutions are addressing both at the same time because each has a bearing on the other. How you wish to reflect it is up to you, or you do not wish to. I leave it to my days not to disturb the document which is coming up. The last point I want to make is about prioritization. I think it's an excellent one. I understand that the way the report has been formulated, it brings out the prioritization of the 4 fields. But I think a little more specific will be useful. We have another organization, which I don't want to name, whose recommendation run into 78 paragraphs. Nobody reads it. It just goes into a shelf somewhere. I think it is important that we prioritize it, irrespective of the 14 or 24 points in due course of time. But prioritization is a must, and in prioritization, maritime security, I think, should take the top position because it has ramifications on almost every other field. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, Gurpreet.
Thank you, sir. This flows from what was just said, and Ambassador Yogendra Kumar also mentioned it. What has been mentioned in this, I think if we are serious about implementing that, for instance, rules-based maritime order, common maritime strategy, I think we must have a specialist working group for that. Because, for instance, if you have to have a common interpretation of freedom of navigation, what is India and Bangladesh, their approaches to the transit of foreign warships through their territorial waters, that is, negotiated passage is similar, but it is different from other countries. So these are the issues. I think if you do not have a specialist working group, you will not be able to achieve what you have put in the paper. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please.
Honorable Chair and distinguished participants, I just want to comment on this maritime security, and I'm specifically concerned with the connectivity. And so far, Nepal and Bhutan, those 2 countries are not linked to the sea. So how these 2 countries can be included and can be linked to the this blue economy? So I just would like to request this eminent forum to add this BIMSTEC to carry out a research or a study with experts to find out the ways to link these 2 countries, Bhutan and Nepal, through rivers. As I have just received a very important book written by the scholar Somen Banerjee from Vivekananda International Foundation, and this book has also explored some ways how to connect to those countries to Nepal and Bhutan, because the capital of blue economy is Nepal and Bhutan, because the rivers and floras are originated from the Himalayas. And so we would like to share the benefits also, not only the hazards and the disaster risks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just come to you. Anil?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I have also taken up from the various points that have been made before, 2 or 3 points. One is that I think it's important before the next meeting of this body takes place, the think tanks who are present here should at least be in touch with each other. And not only this, but this is supposed to be the core, but this core should be expanded in the meantime, because you can always find some expertise elsewhere. You have already a set of recommendations. Of course, they are general in nature, but I think as time goes by, and by the time the next meeting takes place, we have to come to specifics, a little bit more of the specifics. And it has to be, like I would agree with Ambassador Rajgopal, and it should be prioritized, because you can't have a long laundry list, and again, we'll be lost in implementation. And my sympathies are with the Secretariat, because they don't have the wherewithal actually to follow up on so many recommendations which come out of all these meetings. That's very, very important, therefore, that we have that prioritization in place. And this body is the right body to recommend what should be prioritized, so that the policymakers have that option before them. I think linkages of BIMSTEC Secretariat with other bodies, which has come out in this discussion, is very important, because much work has been done by other bodies before. And I don't think we should reinvent that wheel. We should just take up those practices and implement them, and even make use of what expertise they have for the implementation. In fact, the BIMSTEC Secretariat should be able to rely on expertise which exists elsewhere for this purpose, because they don't have that necessary wherewithal and resources to implement that. And when we fix the next meeting, I think some more notice should be given, if it is possible, so that people get prepared, beforehand, and that you have your thought and thinking process in place before the next meeting happens. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Anil. Now that you are on the other side of the government, you can make these comments. Till recently, you were being flung these comments. No, my point is that, we should work with the resources that we have. That is the best way to prioritize things. If you have a resource, as you said, BIMSTEC Secretariat right now, and there's a recommendation here. Till the BIMSTEC Secretariat itself is strengthened, and that is a call to be taken by the BIMSTEC leaders. Let's not forget that we were a think tank. We just won somewhere on the periphery of the overall BIMSTEC. So we should not assume that we have become the BIMSTEC decision makers. So we should just give some suggestions. And fortunately, since we are not charged with the implementation, so we can take it easy. But still, I think it's good not to generate too many suggestions, because that will become very difficult. But what we'll do is, if some people can volunteer, we can come out with a report in which more of this can be added. And I think this point about remaining in touch is very important. And once we start, thinking about the next meeting, etc., that remaining in touch would be very happen. And I would also recommend the various think tanks to go back and generate awareness, have seminars, have their own activities, and generate those ideas, papers, etc. And let us make a report. This we can do. We can have it on our website, for instance, all the BIMSTEC papers that are generated. Like supposing you want to talk about Indonesia, which is a recommendation by you, but it is reasoned. I can put it in our website, or we can have some. We have some journals in which we can air these ideas. So I think airing of ideas is very important, and really it's up to the government, or the BIMSTEC Secretary, to take a call whether they accept it or they don't accept it. So, but the very useful. Yogi, very briefly, you're coming back. Yeah.
No, actually, this is in regard to our friend from Nepal, that the landlocked member countries of BIMSTEC. I'd actually made a suggestion in my presentation that we can set up a consultative mechanism where the member countries of BIMSTEC, who are members of IORA or IONS or HECAM, they actually have a consultative mechanism with the other countries, because they also have some interest, maritime interest, and also particularly in terms of maritime connectivity issues. So we can do that, and therefore we get a feedback, and that gets filtered. That gets disseminated through the Secretariat and through the entire organization. Thank you.
You want to comment on this?
Yes. With this concern, Sumit has very kindly put in this clause here, which is very critical, and of course raised by my friend from Nepal, in the sense that we have said that development for common prosperity through better connectivity and accessibility. So it's that concern is there here in the document, but of course we can further disaggregate it, go a little bit further. That's one comment I want to make. Second is the importance of including the reference to the parliament, partly because there is also the question of legal assistance, and then ratification, where the role of parliament is very important. So that is the other one. And the third point perhaps we could do is on clause 5 on the deliberations and recommendations subject threat of terrorism. Perhaps some reference to the Kathmandu document would be very, very, very important, on the last one, because that has a very nice wording in terms of state responsibility and identifying states that.
Which page is it?
It's page number 2. Page number 2. So it's a brief reference to the Kathmandu document, I think, would strengthen the.
That's I think.
V, the final one, terrorism must not be used as a tool of state policy. Page 2, number 5, it is important that states. So the Kathmandu declaration language is very, very well done, well crafted. So maybe that one is. Exactly.
Yeah, sure.
BIMSTEC is a member-driven organization. It is not a secretary-driven organization. But so we need to keep that distinction. Now, if you take the UNSCAP, an entire UN system, those are secretary-driven organizations. They can deliver results much faster. But what happens in BIMSTEC and SAARC and all other organizations, when it becomes a member-driven organization, regional organization, things are not that easy to deliver. I think we need to keep that in mind. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, sir, can I ask Pankaj?
Yeah, I'll come to him in a moment. Let me just take a few comments. And then
he
can
has some
respond to
clarification.
Yes. Yes, Gautam Sen.
You see, in the light of my experience as senior advisor to the central government and to some of the state governments in the Northeast, I would like to say the main thrust of all this should be to see that the essential services and basic livelihood of the people are taken care of as a first priority. The other macro things can be worked on in due course. So that should be. And towards this end, the main emphasis should be to link the resources already available, develop some standard operating procedure or protocol. And these should be the main things we should target at. And the other efforts towards the larger framework should continue. And there are certain inherent weaknesses I found, like you see, even in our northeastern region, the various state governments are not in sync with the government of India's framework. There's a lot of weaknesses I found in the states of Arunachal, states of Nagaland, Manipur. So these needs to be tackled as a priority. Otherwise, the effort will not yield the proper outcome. And on the issue of parliamentarians, already we have the standing committee on the Ministry of Home Affairs, which are dealing with disaster management issues. So there is no problem on that score. We can move forward and expand the framework towards people-to-people contact through the parliamentarians, which will facilitate, enactment of laws and regulations in that regard. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody who would like to make a comment? Yes.
Firstly, it's wonderful to see all the 7 countries. It's like meeting cousins all together rather than meeting them.
Enjoyed that.
Yeah, rather than meeting them in distant marriages in Holland, in England, in Australia. So where you find a person who's got the same complexion and speaks like you. So it's good to see you all together. So I think that is one of the aims, which was very, very wonderful. And second point, as was brought out by the chairman, that we are not the government, we are 1.5. So the idea is to generate some ideas, propagate them in our country so they become popular. I have noticed that many a time the think tanks generate some ideas which look impossible, which look improbable, which look unimplementable. But suddenly after 2-3 years, they are caught on. So I think that should be our aim. Actually, if you seriously ask me, it is delightful to see all of us together. And we have got all similar problems. We have got similar, obsessions, similar aspirations. So out of all, we are all developing. So out of all of us, sparks can be taken out, which can be propagated within our country and outside, as the director said. They can be given to the websites, they can be given to the press. And lo and behold, suddenly you find ideas becoming acceptable, not only in this country, but all over the region. That should, in my view, be the task of these think tanks and these meetings. We are not competent enough to go into very many technicalities. That for that we must thank our bureaucrats who continue to ponder over issues and somehow come to no conclusions at all. We are not bureaucrats. So I think basically we should generate ideas, but generate ideas on priority, put the priorities. And the last point I want to make out is that there is always an economic content as far as security is concerned. So I think there is a requirement for talking about economy. There is a requirement for talking about trade. There is a requirement of talking to each other's, what do you call, commercial organizations. So we should be able to invest in each other's country, because that I think is a very binding factor. I found that is happening in Bangladesh. It is happening so well that ultimately the whole thing is becoming into one sort of a whole, the economy. So I think these are the type of ideas, rather than going into legalistic things, should be holistic sort of a thing. And ultimately, as the ambassador very eloquently brought out, that it is possible, I think, to be lyrical, it is possible to be poetical, it is possible to be sometime impossible. But out of this, I think good ideas would come out. And I think the VIF, I think, is very grateful that, as the director has said, that we could get all of you together. It was, believe me, very difficult task, but it was ultimately possible. We wrote so many emails, we put so many things together, that now that we are all together, I do wish that we will keep in touch, because getting in touch with you took a long time.
We still have some more people to. Yes, Pankaj? Yeah.
I'll just say a few points. One question was regarding a working group on maritime security. In fact, India has circulated a concept paper last year on maritime security, and we have circulated to all the member states, and we are receiving comments from them. And it talks of having a working group to deliberate on the subject. Parallelly, we have also have two concept papers submitted by India on space-based cooperation and Himalayan Science Council. These two also have circulated, and these two documents also talk of having a working group or expert group. In fact, many of these proposals are also there in the second NSA meeting report. They talk of expert group and working group to deal with these subjects. It is there. Then coming to a question from I think from this regarding connectivity issues to Bhutan and Nepal, these landlocked countries, we are developing this BIMSTEC master plan on connectivity. In fact, we should have finalized that by end of September this year. So far, we have submitted 2 drafts, and we are taking the assistance of ADB. So final draft we are going to submit on 23rd of this month. And in the next working group meeting, that is a BIMSTEC transport connectivity working group meeting, which will be held in probably New Delhi, we are going to finalize that. And our objective is to finally approve this document in the next ministerial meeting, which is likely to be held in Colombo. So there we talk about this all the connectivity issues of the landlocked countries, particularly inland waterways, then multimodal transport, how to link Bhutan and Nepal to the seas and to inland waterways, to Haldia, Kolkata, to Chittagong. So these things are there in the master plan, and probably the concerns of the landlocked countries will be addressed in the master plan. Then coming to another points regarding our cooperation with the international organizations, we have received a mandate in the 4th BIMSTEC summit. In fact, this is not reflected in the summit declaration, but before the summit, there was a ministerial meeting, and before the ministerial meeting, there were 2 senior officials meeting. It is recorded in those deliberations, as per which the secretary has been given the mandate to talk to other international organizations for having a kind of working relationships. So we have taken up with ADB. We have already requested ADB for a formal MOU, who they are drafting on our behalf. We have also been asked to draft a concept paper on case by case basis, which we are doing. Have already done for ADB. So next in line would be UN Escape. So we are working on all these aspects as of now. Thank you.
Great.
Sure. I'm sorry to be coming back, but Sumit triggered me. Sumit's comment triggered me an idea when he talked about a member-driven organization. You know what they do in the UN? Whenever there is a problem, they'll say, oh, you member states. But whenever the agenda has to be driven, in fact, it's the secretariat. And that is critical. The short reference I made in terms of my real concern on the basis of the long exposure to both SARC and UN is that if BIMSTEC is to be different and to be more effective, one, of course, the measure is the driving of the national leadership, member state leadership. But there is this idea, and the reason why I said yesterday that why we have to come together is had the collective security, collective prosperity, collective dignity with which the whole UN was created in the aftermath of the World War II, there'll probably be no need for us to move around like this. Why did that not happen at the UN? And why has that not happened in SARC even miserably? And why is even the EU, which we thought was most successful model of regional cooperation, both in security and economic cooperation, is now encountering difficulty? And the view is, my view is, one is the secretariat plays a pivotal role because each national governments will obviously look at things from their national perspective. The national interest will be the driving force. So in technical terminology of international relations, is called the collective legitimization of individual national interests. That will ultimately bring countries together, create trust. So there is the Kathmandu Summit declaration, there is a special focus on secretariat structure and creating the secretariat. So I would urge, Mr. Chairman, that in fact, as think tanks interested at the moment on security, but not just security, on the broader dimension of how to make BIMSTEC region more prosperous, more secure, and more dignified, is a focus that we must give as think tanks on how the secretariat should be structured so that it does not repeat some of the problems that we have. So that is a point that I thought was very important that we must reflect as think tanks. Thank you.
Please. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, as I said before, I am from track 1 myself, and I learned a lot as a government side from the wisdom and comments made around the room from the audience as well, from my fellow panelists as well. I'm here, as I said again, just to deliver the thoughts from the Thai think tank from Bangkok, and I have already delivered it. But if you allow me to just stress only one point, which I believe that Mr. Dasho, the director of RIGSS, might agree with me because you mentioned something about that too. And I would like to raise this to the consideration of our BIMSTEC Secretariat as well. We have mentioned about the importance for the think tanks to continue to keep the momentum rolling, to have our to stay connected and to go together. So Professor Surat himself mentioned something that is the BNPTT, the Bangkok, I'm sorry, not Bangkok, the BIMSTEC network of policy think tanks. I'm not quite sure that it might be suitable or not to put it on the last page when we talk about the just another way of keeping the think tank connected in the BIMSTEC area. Thank you, sir.
Okay. So I think if nobody else has any very urgent point to make, something which we have not discussed.
Can I take
Yeah,
3
all right.
seconds?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So now we spoke about a lot of initiatives, ideas, prioritizing, and it was repeatedly said about finances. Now, how are we going to find money for these initiatives? Now, the BIMSTEC Secretariat, I think, is not very rich organization to implement them. So should we really think, even for the future, how are we going to raise money? How do we need a recommendation, we need a mechanism, something like setting up of a BIMSTEC Ocean Development Fund. Food for thought.
So let's discuss it in our next
Yes, sir. I
meeting,
mean,
because
for the
funding,
next
etc., is very important. Very briefly. I think, see, the network of BIMSTEC think tanks was mentioned. I remember I have come across this term earlier also, but I don't know what has been done and what has been discussed. That's though when this forum was set up, that network did exist. But since we didn't know much about it, we thought that let us set up one forum which will discuss only security issues, because it was coming from the NSAs meeting. So that's why we focused on the security, and of course we kept out. There are 14 other pillars. Connectivity is a huge, huge thing in BIMSTEC, and they're discussing it. Even counterterrorism, cyber security, so many other things they're doing it. So it is also necessary for this forum to identify what is it that it will discuss. So part of your prioritization comes in the and the working of this forum also. The second point I want to make is, if on, let's keep it the focus essentially on the security issues, as was mentioned by him also yesterday, that you must now start building trust among the institutions, and must show something which is positive. Specialist forum that you mentioned, but probably it is going to come from somewhere else. It seems that there is already some work being done here, but nevertheless, let the member countries supply us a list of what are the think tanks or even the experts who are available in various countries. We can make a kind of a directory and start using their expertise. And this idea of setting up a website or a link or something, that we can certainly look into. And as I said, if you can give us some papers, we can publish. We have a national security journal which we have ourselves launched some months ago. We call it a national security publication. In that, we can include some of these provoking ideas that you have mentioned, which are which go in the name of the individual author. So we had planned a separate session on the media, but media people are already, some of them are here. So maybe we can now convert this into a questions from the media, and some of the panelists or anybody else who wishes to answer. And maybe we can take a few questions maybe in the next 15 minutes or so. And then we can break for lunch, so that you have a free afternoon.
Good idea.
Yeah, if it's okay. So you finish the section now. I think within the guidelines that we have issued. So that's the over. We don't have to come back now to this panel and distribute it, of course. Yeah. So we take the media. Okay. Yeah.
I thank Session 5 panel for the lively and candid discussions and recommendations for the way ahead. Rather than prioritizing major parts and their policies, it is time we start prioritizing ourselves. May I request the Session 5 panel to remain seated and the media representatives to come in the first row so that they can directly engage in questions.
Or they can ask from wherever they are.
Wherever they're seated.
They're all there. Yes, please.
I'm Dinako Peri with the Hindu newspaper. So it was a great listening to the discussion yesterday and today. Just two questions. Yeah, two questions. One, you have the Secretariat official, Mr. Pankaj, has talked about the current progress on some of the issues which they're working on, the connectivity, the draft, and all that. So can you just give an overview of that so we can take it out in a nutshell of the, because there was a lot of discussion and we had scattered points. So one, can we have a one consolidated gist of what's all happening on that front?
On which front?
On connectivity and various agendas being worked out right now. On code of conduct and space cooperation, that thing. The second, interesting, we've just been chatting around. So, it is all the regional grouping, and the big country which all of us have is China. Neighbor to all of us and a big neighbor, but we're all vary in a certain way. So, is this platform a certain way to kind of hedge against China in some way?
The answer to your second question is no. And answer to first question has already been provided. But if you want to add something, Mr. Pankaj, on connectivity. Yeah, so that it becomes a good story for them.
Thank you, Chair. On connectivity front, actually, the Goa retreat of 2016, it has laid down certain this direction to the Secretariat and all to the member states. These directions have come in two forms. One is the outcome document. Second is the agenda of action. In the outcome document, it talks about having a Binstock motor vehicle agreement. And then in the agenda of action, it talks about having a BIMSTEC master plan on connectivity, then BIMSTEC coastal shipping agreement, and also it talks about seamless kind of integration with ASEAN countries. So a coastal shipping agreement was drafted by India. We had the first round of discussion in November last year. And then beside the agreement, there is also standard operating procedures and coastal regulations, which we have circulated to the member states. So they have been considering these three documents as of now. Then motor vehicle agreement, it was also drafted by India. We had the first round of discussion in April this year in Delhi. That again, we have circulated to member states for further comments. So waiting for comments. And in fact, these are some of the document issues again spoken in the summit at various forums. Then the master plan of connectivity that we are developing with the technical assistance of ADB. We have got a technical assistance program of ADB till 31st of December 2018. So financial support is given by ADB for developing the master plan. Even the consultant is engaged by ADB. We had one working group meeting last year in Bangkok. Then we had one workshop after the summit again in Bangkok, and we are going to have the third this BTCWG, BIMSTEC Transport Connectivity Working Group, probably in Delhi. And we thought of having it in December, so that has to be seen how it can be arranged. So basically, the objective is to finalize that in that meeting, and we are going to circulate the final version probably on 23rd of this month. So on connectivity fronts, we have been working on these three documents as of now. So nothing more.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, yes, please. This outcome document, what happens to it? Is it circulated among member governments? Are they required to respond? Is there a deadline of some kind? Is the NSAs driving this? And secondly, BIMSTEC is largely focused on connectivity and related issues. Isn't there a lot of focus here on terrorism? Well, as far as the outcome document is concerned, I think is one way of summarizing, putting together the suggestions which have emerged. And as I had mentioned yesterday, we hope that the governments will take on board some of these suggestions, but it's really up to the governments as to what they do. The whole idea of setting up this forum was that the BIMSTEC security issues or the security challenges faced by the BIMSTEC countries, people outside the narrow confines of official circles should also deliberate over it. And as you can see, the response has been overwhelming. The number of suggestions which have emerged have been very good, and the governments are supporting it. And I think, as Mr. Pankaj Saran yesterday said, that they would be looking at these recommendations very closely. But in terms of what happens to them, this will now go into the BIMSTEC secretariat with them, and they will circulate it among the various governments. And when the next set of meetings are planned, they have those 14, 15, and next meeting of NSA chiefs, etc. They will have a look at these recommendations and decide what they have to do. And this morning, and that was about disasters, when it was pointed out, without undermining any other security risk, we probably are not putting enough in disasters where thousands upon thousands of people are affected, they are killed, casualties, and hundreds of thousands get impacted. And the number of, and India is a lead country in that. And there was a very good recommendations which have come out. And it was also pointed out that each country has set up a very responsive mechanism. And now it's a question of building synergies between them, adding capacity to it. And I think by focusing on disaster, we have really done a very good job, I would say, because this normally gets overlooked or not given so much importance. So these issues cannot, they are all very important. And it is for the agenda that we had selected these 4 issues given the time and so on. But as I said that we would be taking up other issues as well. So there is no, and climate change, for instance, non-traditional security issues, all these have been mentioned in great detail. Yes, please.
I'm Nitin Gokhale. I'm a journalist with 2 websites which I run. I have 2 questions, and this was a think tank dialogue on regional security. So I just want to ask this draft that you've circulated in this threat of terrorism, radicalization, and response by BIMSTEC countries. In that, the 5th point, terrorism must not be used as a tool of state policy. First of all, has there been a consensus on what is the definition of terrorism amongst the member countries? I needed to ask other members of this forum, not just India, but other members. 1. And 2, so if it is to be dealt with on a regional level, terrorism and radicalization, what mechanism do you suggest? Because I believe under the joint working group, there is a subgroup on sharing intelligence. And if I'm not mistaken, the gentleman from Sri Lanka is heading that subgroup, trying to share that intelligence, creating a database. So I would like to know from you, what is the progress there? I think you've had about 2 or 3 meetings, and one is scheduled in February. So how are you, panel?
Well, having been involved in this process for the last so many years, you obviously are really well aware of the difficulty of agreeing on the notion called definition of terrorism, in the sense that we briefly discussed about the nature of the activity that on the whole the panel around perceives as being not consistent with the harming of the civilians, not involved in active combat. So as a result, there is a, if I may say so, there was a teacher of music who used to come and every time give a lesson on his music. And there was one student who always used to say, "Sir, can you define terrorism? Or can you define music?" And after 4 or 5 times, the teacher said, "Well, look, if you can't feel it, I can't tell you." So that's the stage we are in.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, I have nothing to add on this issue. The United Nations still yet to come on defining this terrorism. Somebody's terrorism is others' freedom fighting. So it's it's a very old debatable question. So we have not talked about that. But one question that at least some of the Secretary General has defined in United Nations, that act of terrorism. Any attack of threat or attack against the innocent civilians is a terrorism. So we have talked about all the attacks. There is no dispute amongst identifying the attacks, terming them as a terrorism, like 26/11, 9/11, Dhaka, Holly Artisan. So we did not have any disputes among identifying acts which are of terrorism. So automatically that is what is it, as you said, the silent consensus automatically built. I take it in that way. So automatically now people do not make such mistakes that which attack is terrorism and which attack is not terrorism. The question is, target is innocent civilians.
Can I add one word? I mean, although we don't have a definition of terrorism, all the countries very well know what we are doing. So I think as BIMSTEC, our territory or our country's territory must never be used to be a threat to another country. Whether we have a definition or not, I think that should be our bottom line principle, that our territory should never be used with the state sponsorship to be using violence against another country.
Yeah, to answer the present status of the intelligence sharing mechanism, and actually Sri Lanka has been given is a lead shepherd of this subgroup, intelligence sharing subgroup, and the initial meeting on this was held in 2013. Then subsequent meeting we had 14 and 15, and now in the progress of this thing, and I think every country has accepted that we need a mechanism to share intelligence. Only thing issue is the establishment of data. Now we are at the last meeting we were discussing on establishment database, and there are some concessions. There are some concerns by the member states to where we are going to have it, and that is the place that we have stopped. I think next year we hopefully we're going to start next meeting. Then in that meeting will be can discuss and finalize the all relevant things. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, I think, is there any other question from a journalist?
Yeah, hungry now.
Well, I think we have exhausted these questions, and we are also exhausted this panel. I think it's been on the table for a long time, but it's my pleasant duty to thank the panelists, and I also take this opportunity to thank all of you who have come from long distances at short notice, but have made some very substantive contribution. And I want to thank Sumiji for working out this draft well in time. And this has been endorsed by this House and will now circulate it through the BIMSTEC. I want to thank the BIMSTEC Secretariat for their very hard work. And it all started with about 5 or 6 names which we got in the first email. And then we built upon that. So incrementally, I think it builds. And finally, we had an excellent response. We were hoping that probably there'll be about 10 or 12 people who would come, but we have had an overwhelming response. And I think that's a takeaway for the NSAs, that there is a lot of enthusiasm in the strategic community, non-official strategic community, to discuss these issues, to look at BIMSTEC as a holistic region and deal with these problems without it being seen to be directed against anyone. You know, there's no hedge or no third parties involved. We ourselves have so many issues, and I think semantics like what is terrorism is only going to hold you back. And on the other hand, when a terrorism attack happens like we were able to exchange information very quick time and very useful information. So I think there is a way to basically we should strengthen mechanisms. So many of these recommendations are there. So thank you very much for coming. And now we have some announcement. And I also want to thank my team. A lot of people have been working behind the studio, and also the NSAs team, who looked after all this protocol work, etc. And we have worked as a team, and we will once again work as a team. So this has been a very good experience.
May now request Dr. Gupta to give a small token of appreciation, some BIF research publications, and the group photo to delegation heads.
So you were able to get those photographs. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Oh yeah, okay. Thank you. Adding to your
From Bangladesh, Major General Abdul Rashid. From Sri Lanka, Admiral Kulambage.
Thank you, sir.
From Bhutan, Mr. Dasho Chegan.
Let's show this photograph. What we are giving. This is wow. Nice. Can you see yourself? Yeah. You have seen, like Arjuna, you have seen yourself. All right. Very nice. I'm proud, sir. Very nice. Adding to your weight. Yeah. Sir, but no, sir. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Nepal, Ambassador Simkhata.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for your invitations and comments.
India, Joint Secretary Hemant Kotalwar.